the mainstream again is denying that and saying it's actually the unvaccinated that are causing the variants. So can you speak to that?
If we were to go back a year ago, everybody was unvaccinated. So we'd all agree on that. And a year ago, we would have a dozen different strains with no dominant strain. So everyone would agree in the unvaccinated condition, we have many different strains and there's no particular dominant one. And there's a collaboration between Boston and the Mayo Clinic. The company in Boston is called Inference, and it's the Mayo Clinic academic group. And they have 1 million cases that they're sequenced. So they know exactly what strains people have, and they know the regions where they're vaccinated. And the first authors, Neeson and colleagues, they have concluded that once you get to 25% vaccinated, then of the dozen or more strains, one of the strains will come forward because the strain has figured out how to get past the vaccine. And that's exactly what Delta did. What initially triggered Delta was the Sinovac vaccine, the Coronavac vaccine, which is the killed whole virus vaccine. That's what caused Delta to emerge in India. Then it became the emergent and dominant strain in the UK and now in the United States. And I can tell you back in April timeframe, Delta was just a small percentage, and it quickly went to 30%, then 80%. Now our departments of community health in Texas are telling us it's 100%. I mean, why? Because Delta has figured out how to get past the vaccines. It's just like giving everybody a narrow spectrum antibiotic. Wouldn't we expect there'd be a resistant bug? Of course we would. That's the reason why it's ill-advised and not good strategy to vaccinate large numbers of people. We don't do this for anything else. For the pneumococcal vaccine, we just vaccinate high-risk seniors. Shingles vaccine, the same thing. We don't, for prevalent diseases, we don't vaccinate the whole population. So here we are in the middle of an outbreak, middle of a pandemic, and our governments are pushing for more vaccines. We've got the Delta variant that's literally just laughing at these vaccines, scooting right past it. And a wonderful paper by Krishnan and colleagues showed what's called antigenic escape. That is, certainly for Pfizer, the Delta virus is just, the vaccine can't hit it. The antibodies from the vaccine cannot hit Delta enough to slow it down. Actually, the week ending August 6th in Israel, 83% of all the COVID cases in Israel are in those fully vaccinated. Israel is kind of interesting because there are segments of Israel that are highly vaccinated, about 86%, but there's others that haven't taken the vaccine. So when we look fairly at both Jewish and Arab Israelis and those communicating back and forth in the Palestinian territories, they may be at 56% vaccinated. Yet it's the vaccinated that are loading up Israeli hospitals. In fact, the majority of those dying with COVID-19 are vaccinated. Same thing in the UK. The majority, even though Delta has a lower mortality rate, those dying in the UK are more likely to be vaccinated than unvaccinated.
So when it comes to the America, I know people are really hitting this notion that it's all the unvaccinated in the hospitals, which I know that the CDC lumped together data from January, if I'm correct, in terms of how to create that 99% threshold or 95 to 99% idea, because back in January, most people weren't vaccinated, right? So they lumped together a huge amount of data to create that number. But either way, let's just say that in America, if we are seeing many cases as being argued of unvaccinated in the hospitals or worse reactions to, let's say, Delta or COVID in general from the unvaccinated, how would you respond to that claim?
You know, it's so interesting. The CDC is a treasure trove of information. So the CDC website. So I just quoted you, July 26th, the CDC had not all the cases, but they had a sample of 6,000 Americans hospitalized, fully vaccinated, 19% died. So from the CDC's own reporting, it cannot be a crisis of just the unvaccinated. Just go to the CDC website and look. Separately, the CDC published in their journal, the MMWR, a paper from Barnstable County, Massachusetts, where there was an outbreak, and it was Delta. 2/3 were fully vaccinated. CDC website, it's the CDC's journal. So we can just look at the CDC and understand it cannot be a crisis of the unvaccinated. What may have happened is a created talking point of a crisis of the unvaccinated. And what's probably happened is a lack of data sophistication. So for instance, people who get the vaccine, they do get reported into some type of database. that must happen, right? So there is some number estimated of the percent Americans that took the vaccine. But what the person who gets vaccinated, what they get is they get a vaccine card. That card itself doesn't have a barcode number on it. The manufacturer and lot number sometimes are just handwritten down. You can't even see what the handwriting shows. It's not a very high quality, high tech data piece of information. And yet that vaccine card is relied upon by other users. So as an example, if a vaccinated person goes to an urgent care center, they may forget their vaccine card. In fact, the urgent care center may not ask them if they're vaccinated. And I can tell you this much, Sean, if they get a COVID test result, that test result does not get submitted with the vaccine card information to any central center. That test result just automatically goes by the original executive order to the testing center. So for all the positive COVID tests that are pouring in across the United States, nobody knows who's truly vaccinated or unvaccinated. They can't possibly know. And the CDC actually indicated that May 1st. They said, listen, we give up. We can't possibly know because they were just fielding these sporadic cases coming forward. So we don't know if it's a crisis of the unvaccinated or vaccinated. Now, Israel knows, Gibraltar knows, Singapore knows, UK knows, and it's the same vaccines. It's the same Delta variant. And I can tell you, it's more likely to be a crisis of the vaccinated.
And just to go back to the vaccination for a moment, it seems that because of the injection of the spike protein, essentially you're giving people a sort of a sample, right? It's designed, as Fauci said, to create a robust immune response, right? And so this is not a traditional vaccination in any sense, but it's what many people are responding to, as you mentioned, the injuries or the deaths would seem to be from that spike protein. And then we don't really know the long-term implications of what happens as that spike protein, as you know, more evidence comes out that the spike protein doesn't just stay local to that area, it goes throughout the body, it goes into other organs. So what are the long-term implications of that spike protein going to the body? So maybe people that are vaccinated are temporarily, doing better against COVID because they've been hit with the spike protein, so they can handle it. But as you mentioned with Delta variant, they have no ability to respond to that because, again, it's a different variation, right, of a virus, just as we've seen with flu seasons, right? And you mentioned colds and flus. I mean, it's mind-boggling to me that we don't understand by now that every year there's new variations and that's why you can take a flu shot and still get the flu, right? Or you can get a different cold each year. So again, just to speak to the long-term implications, to me, this is all. It's so illogical. The idea that you still can transmit the virus after getting the vaccine, and you can still get sick with the virus, and you could still potentially die from, let's say, the variant, and then not even knowing the long-term implications of these spike proteins in your system.
Well, I tell you, you've done a great job. I think almost every American, certainly you, Sean, you've almost done a graduate program in vaccinology and virology, but just looking on the drawing board of what's proposed. So Pfizer, Moderna, and J&J are all packaged in lipid nanoparticles. Lipid nanoparticles. Okay, that's the first point. Now, the lipid nanoparticles, papers coming out of China years ago were telling us the lipid nanoparticles go to many places in the body. The hormone-producing organs, the ovaries, the testes, the adrenal glands, they go up into the brain, okay? So just that alone, we'd say, listen, do we want a vaccine going up into the brain? Do we want a vaccine going into the heart? Just that information alone would make people think, wait a minute, is that a smart idea or not? If you ask me as a doctor, I'm involved in drug development. I have over 650 publications in the peer-reviewed literature. I'm the editor of 2 major journals. I review data every day. I've reviewed a dozen papers this morning. If you were just to ask me, Dr. McCullough, would it be wise to create a vaccine made with lipid nanoparticles and have it distribute to all the vital organs in the body and do it in hundreds of millions of people without any prior safety data? I'd say, you know what? I don't think that's wise. Now, if you loaded the question even more and you said, these vaccines are going to trick cells, really critical cells, into producing a dangerous protein, what's called the spike protein. These are the little spines on the ball of the virus. And the spike protein is going to be produced inside these sensitive cells, damage those cells, be expressed on the cell surface, and then have the body's immune system attack its own cells And then the spike protein is going to break free and then circulate in the body freely for at least a couple of weeks, maybe longer. And then the spike protein cause damage to blood vessel cells, cause blood clotting, and have this go on for weeks, if not longer, in our vital organs. I would tell you, under no circumstances should a product that has this type of vision, this type of mechanism of action, I don't care how high the antibodies are that are generated against the spike protein, I would say, you know what, those safety risks look too concerning to move forward. Now, when we fast forward and we actually fill out the data that we know that with the Moderna application to the EMA, that there was reduced fertility in animals because of the idea that this could injure either the testicles or the ovaries. We have a report that Pfizer submitted to the Japanese authorities in animals demonstrating that the lipid nanoparticles hyperconcentrate in the ovaries while they wash out of other organs. We have countless numbers of reports from women where their menstrual periods have been irregular. Postmenopausal women start having menopausal bleeding. So there's an obvious concern regarding women's health. We know that the FDA, the CDC, and Pfizer, Moderna, and the manufacturers in the registrational trials all agreed or knew that pregnant women were excluded, women of childbearing potential, not able to guarantee contraception were excluded, recovered patients like myself excluded, patients with suspected COVID illness, positive antibodies, all excluded. They're excluded for a reason, because there are human ethics committees involved, and they know those groups could either be harmed by the vaccine or they would not benefit, or both. And in fact, that's the case. Now we've learned that these groups are harmed. Let's take COVID recovered. There are 3 studies showing when COVID recovered patients take the vaccine, which they shouldn't, by the way. Remember, the FDA and they were excluded from clinical trials. Anybody excluded from clinical trials, that's a signal. Don't take the product. But they went ahead and took the vaccine anyway. 3 studies show, raw Cameron-Methodius show higher rates of side effects, including things that are serious, require hospitalization. So a COVID recovered patient who has no meaningful chance of getting the infection again should never take the vaccine, period, full stop. Okay, people say, well, you can boost your immunity. No, it's not worth it. There is no boosting of immunity. The natural immunity is far superior to the vaccine immunity. I told you the vaccines are failing. There are thousands and thousands of patients being hospitalized and dying who've taken the vaccine. There's been 0 patients who are COVID recovered in that situation. Paper by Shrestha and colleagues, Cleveland Clinic, fully vaccinated patients, fully vaccinated workers, and then those who are COVID recovered who didn't take the vaccine. They go out into the workplace. Who gets COVID-19? The vaccinated workers. Who doesn't get COVID-19? None. The naturally immune workers. So the data are clear that naturally immune are the backstop, and all the employers out there trying to set policy. If you're worried about having safe employees behind the counter, prioritize your COVID recovered individuals. They don't need the vaccine and they're not going to get sick. Same thing in the military. They should be prioritized under understanding, or at least created in a log of who's COVID recovered. Do you know that our CDC in the vaccine event reporting system, do you know there's no checkbox for someone who's COVID recovered? Our CDC doesn't even know.
Mm. And there could be an antibodies test though, right? I mean, you could test for antibodies to know if you had the antibodies against COVID, right?
Well, the antibodies always fall. The antibodies in the naturally immune are directed against the spike protein, the nucleocapsid, other components, probably hundreds if not thousands of antibodies. With the vaccine immunity, it's just against the limited spike protein. So the vaccine immunity is very narrow. And even though the vaccine immunity has very high levels of antibodies, they drop off quickly, as shown by that paper I quoted, Israel and colleagues. The natural immunity, the antibodies are less, but they're much broader, and they have a longevity that looks a little better over time. But importantly, the natural immunity, what really counts is the lifelong T cell immunity, that kind of memory immunity. So even when the antibodies are completely gone, the body can fight off the virus. And there's been studies using bone marrow biopsy specimens, what have you, to show when the antibodies are gone, someone who's COVID recovered is still fully immune. This is very important. So you don't have to prove your immunity. If someone has a well-documented case of COVID, they were sick, they had the characteristic signs and symptoms, and they had a positive COVID-19 test. That's a well-documented case. That's it. There's no antibody testing needed, no T cell testing, what have you. The only use of these testing, Sean, is in someone like you. Someone like you think you may have got it, you traveled a lot, you're not sure. Sure, get an antibody test. If you are positive on any one of the commercial assays, you're immune. You don't need to do anything more. If you don't turn positive on your antibody, Sean, get a T-detect test. T-detect test is another way of telling. This is using next generation sequencing for chromosomal epigenetic rearrangements in T cells that also confers immunity, confers prior exposure to SARS-CoV-2. A good way to do it is just give a unit of blood. So I give a unit of blood here in Dallas, and they use the Carter Blood Centers uses the Ortho Clinical Diagnostic Assay. I had COVID last October. I gave a unit of blood this spring. I'm positive. I'm good. But even if I was negative, it doesn't matter. I'm still fully immune because I had a well-documented case.
Absolutely. And so, it's ironic, not ironic, it's tragic that what you said, which is common sense, I would think, is actually the fact checkers dispute it. The fact checkers will say that no, natural immunity is not better than the vaccination. Literally, that's the fact checkers for you. And you have heard the CDC advocating that pregnant women should get the vaccination. So we are living in a wonderland, as far as I'm concerned, where there's no logic, there's no reason, there's no rationale. It's just whatever the science and whoever dictates the science says, that becomes the dogma, and the mainstream media parrots that, and the fact checkers go to work to basically deny the evidence, from studies that disagree, from doctors with with empirical experience and anecdotal experience, and just again, it's like the nurses being fired after a year of working, or a year and a half working face to face with COVID patients, but then they won't take the vaccination, so they are being fired. I mean, this is the absurdity of the world in 2021.
Well, a couple words really fit what's going on. So wrongdoing by those in position of authority, that's malfeasance. And it's hard for Americans to understand that malfeasance is going on now. And the other word that really applies to what you just said is propaganda. That's false information promoted for a cause by those in position of authority. So our director of the National Institutes for Allergy and Immunology and our Surgeon General have come on TV, and they've told Americans falsely, with no supportive data, that the vaccine immunity is better than the natural immunity. Now, this is while vaccinated people are pouring into hospitals in Israel and the United Kingdom elsewhere. We have vaccinated individuals being hospitalized in America, okay? And we're having zero COVID recovered patients pour into hospitals. We're having zero COVID recovered patients get sick. We've had seniors, we've had COVID-19 sweep through the nursing homes. It's not sweeping through the nursing home again. When we get a manuscript of people hospitalized with COVID-19, it never says that we have, people are on their third or fourth admission for COVID-19. It's always the first and only admission for COVID-19. So what we're having is it's propaganda. It's basically false information promoted by those in position of authority, probably for a reason. And the reason is probably to promote the vaccine. So the question is, why are our government officials using propaganda to promote a vaccine, which looks like it's not sufficiently effective and it looks like it's not safe? Why are they doing that? And that's what Americans need to ask. Americans need to ask. That's not for you and me to ask that question, but a public needs to demand an answer for this, and certainly ask that it stop. We should never have a government official go on and give another scientifically incorrect statement to Americans. That's actually wrong. And those individuals in those positions and historians are going to call them on it. Medical leaders will call them on it. I certainly will. I'm going to be in it for the long haul. Yeah. I'm going to call them on it because these types of statements that fly in the face of every bit of scientific principle and evidence that we have are harmful to individuals. Those statements are actually promoting COVID recovery patients to get the vaccine and be harmed by it. Okay, that's wrong.
Not just
that's wrong. To actually promote harm in individuals is wrong. That you might as well take a gun and start shooting people. That's wrong. And that's wrongdoing that needs to be sharply called out.
It's more than just the statements. It's actual apartheid systems in the places I mentioned, San Francisco, LA, and New York, where even if you're vaccine recovered, even if you're COVID recovered, if you want to go to an entertainment venue, you want to go inside to eat dinner, potentially in the future you want to travel, you're going to have a vaccine. That literally, as you said, is a very dangerous agenda. And I think everyone has to ask themselves, why is this agenda.
Let's take that up. The CDC for months has had demand letters in demanding them to recognize natural immunity by the full breadth of the data that I've quoted. We have an executive order in Texas here by Governor Abbott early in April, recognizing natural immunity in the executive order for state institutions. Very important. We have the city-state of Monaco officially recognizing natural immunity. Well, listen, Texas, Monaco, there should be the rest of the world recognizing natural immunity. The CDC should recognize natural immunity. Large numbers of individuals who are naturally immune should not receive the vaccine. The vaccine at this point in time either should be completely shut down or be available made for an optional basis for just those who are particularly fearful or unique situations receive the vaccine. Under no circumstances should such a vaccine, whether it gets FDA approved or not approved, under no circumstances should a vaccine should anybody receive any pressure, coercion, or the threat of reprisal for a vaccine at this point in time that's just not sufficiently effective nor safe for human use. And I'll let that be the last word.
I appreciate that. And I appreciate your time, because this conversation, as you know, will now be censored by YouTube and we'll both be slandered for even having it. But I think that anyone with some level of clarity of thought can appreciate everything that has been said today. So thank you so much.
Thank you.